Hi guys, and welcome to the 9th episode of the Discord.NET bot development series. In this episode we are going to talk, as promised, about welcoming members. Now what I mean by welcoming members basically means that when someone joins the server, we send a nice message to our specified channel which contains an image that we made earlier in episode 7. You know, the nice image that we generate with someone's avatar and some nice text. And in this episode, we're going to use that image generation and apply it to welcome new members. Now let's get started. The first thing we want to do is go to our tutorial context because we want to add two new things to our server class. So what are we going to add? That's a good question, and we are going to add a background URL so people can customize the background of the image. And we're going to add a channel ID of where the messages should be sent to so that we can store a channel, then fetch the channel and then send the image that we generated towards that channel. So in here we create a new line and we say public ulong and then let's say welcome. So we're going to use this property in order to store the ID of the channel which we use in order to send the images to. So we say curly brackets and then we say get semicolon set. We want to get the value but also be able to modify the value. Next we say public string and let's call this one background. So we're going to call this background and then curly brackets get set. So we can also modify and fetch the background URL. Now let's go to tools, NuGet package manager, and then the package manager console. And now it's time to update the database. But before we do so, there are two things we want to do. The first one is we want to go to the Windows search bar and then we want to type in examp. And then you want to make sure that you start MySQL. And if you like to see the website of Apache in regards to the database, and also start Apache. And then if you did start Apache, then also open up the MySQL admin page and then minimize it. Let's also minimize examp. And now what we want to do here is the second thing we want to do is we want to set the default project to infrastructure and we want to set the starter project to also infrastructure. Then we go here and now we can create our new migration. So previously in the episodes we called it the initial version and the second version. So now it's time to call our new migration the third version. So we say add -migration third version, just like that. Let it build, and then when it's done, what you can do is you can type in update-database, just like that. Now we'll push the changes, and if we go back to our browser, and if we go and take a look in the tutorial database, and then in the service table, you'll now see that we also have a background, and we have a welcome ID. Let's go back to Visual Studio. Let's close this migration. And now we can start making some functions in order to modify these two values. Let's go to the service class, which is also right here. So click on the service class. And there are a few functions that we want to make. We want to modify the ID of the welcome channel. And we also want to be able to clear it. Because what if we no longer want to receive those messages? Say you want to just disable them. In that case, we just want to set the value to 0 or null. And we also want to create functions that are able to change the background URL, but also again clear it. And in that case, it will just stick with the default background. Now let's go here and say private async task. And for the first function, we don't want to return anything. So we just say modify welcome async. And of course, what we want to pass in is the ulong ID, which is the server ID. And we want to pass in a ulong channel ID for the new channel. Curly brackets, and inside we say var server equals await underscore context. So we don't want to use the database. We want to go inside of the service table and we want to find the first record that has the same ID as the server that was passed in. Now again, if the server simply doesn't exist, so if the server equals null, then we want to add the server to our database. So we say underscore context dot add and a new server, curly brackets, the ID of the server is the ID that was passed in, and the welcome is the channel ID that was passed in too, just like that. Now, if that's not the case, then we just want to modify the value. So we say server.welcome equals the new channel ID. And finally, what we want to do is we want to say await underscore context dot save changes async. There you go. Now, as I mentioned before, we also want a function that's able to clear this value, and we also want a function that's able to fetch the value for us. So what we do here is we create a new line and we say private async task clear welcome async. So we want to use this function in order to clear the channel. And the only thing we need to pass in here is the ID of the server. Curly brackets, and inside here the first thing we want to do is say var server equals await underscore context dot servers, and then find async the first server that has the ID of our server that we passed in right there. Then we want to say server dot welcome equals null, and finally we say await underscore context dot save changes async. Now we also want a function that's able to fetch the value of the welcome channel for us. So here we say private async task, and as return type we want a ulong, and then we say get welcome async, and we pass in the server ID. Then we say var server equals await underscore context dot servers, and then we want to find async, again the server that's matching the ID, and then we say return await task dot from result, and then the server dot welcome. So we return the ulong of the welcome channel right over here, and then we can also fetch, modify, and clear the value. Now next, we also want to be able to do exactly these functions for the background. So here what we can do is we can just copy all of this and then paste it right there, and now we can just replace some names. So instead of using modify welcome async, we say modify background async, and instead of the ulong channel ID, we use a string URL. Then right over here we say if the server is null, we just add the server to the context, and instead of using welcome equals the channel ID, we say background equals the URL. And of course, if the value already exists, we say server.background equals the URL. Then here, of course, instead of using clear welcome async, we say clear background async. And instead of using server.welcome equals null, we use server.background equals null. So literally null, not zero, but just null. And here we say get welcome async. Instead of using that, we say get background async. And instead of returning the welcome, we return the background. And finally, we also want to change the return type of this to a string, so we can return the URL of the background as a string. Now previously we made a configuration class in which all the commands are made in order to work with the ranks, with the prefix and that kind of stuff. So let's go all the way down here and create a new command. Now let's call this command welcome. Very simple, very nice, works perfect. And again, we want to only allow users that have the guild permission .administrator to be able to use this command. We don't want anyone else to use this command. Now we don't really require any specific mod permissions, so we're just going to skip over that, and we can just create our new function. So we say public async task, and we call this welcome, and then we pass in two arguments. The first one is a argument in regards of what we want to change. So for example, do we want to enable the welcome module? Do we want to disable it? Or do we want to clear it? Now the first parameter that we are going to use is to give some options. For example, do we want to modify the background? Do we want to modify the channel? That kind of stuff. So the first argument, we're just going to call this a string option. So which option do we want to modify? And the second value that we're going to use is a string and then a value. So if there's an option passed in, then what's the value that it should be replaced for example, for the background. Now we use two curly brackets, and now we need to check some things. The first one is that we can make both parameters optional. So it's equals null and equals null, just like that. So both parameters are optional, and if none of both parameters are given, in that case what we should do It just gives some information about the module, just like what we did with auto roles and ranks. So here what we can do is we can say if the option equals null and the value equals null, so if both values are null, in that case we're going to do something inside of here. So the first thing we want to do here is we want to get some information about both the channel and the background. If the channel is not set, it means that the welcoming module is disabled, meaning that there is nothing for us to return, and that's the very first thing that we want to check. But before doing so, I noticed a small issue. If we go back to the service class, I made the issue to make all of these methods private, meaning that we cannot access them in any other classes. So let's just copy the public of right here and paste it all over this. So replace everywhere where it says private, replace it with public. And now if we go back to the configuration, the first thing we want to do is we want to say var fetched channel ID, just like that, equals await underscore servers dot get, and then welcome async, and then we pass in the context.guild.id. Now what we want to check is if the fetched channel ID equals 0, so if it's set to none, if there's no channel being set, in that case what we want to return is we want to say await reply async, and then we say there has not been set a welcome channel yet. So the module is not really in use, it won't do anything, and then we can just return it. Now if it is the case, we also want to fetch the background. So what we can do here is we can say var fetch background, and then we can say await underscore servers dot get background async, and we pass again the context.guild.id, like that. So what we can do now is we can check if there's a background, and if it is, then we can send the background along, and if it's not, then we just only tell the user which channel is currently being used. But here's another thing that we can nicely do. What if the channel has been deleted? And we only noticed that because we just executed the command. It's a nice thing to, in that case, remove the channel from the database. And the best time to do this is before actually fetching the background. So let's go back here and say var fetched channel equals context.guild.get text channel, and then the fetched channel ID, just like that. Now if the fetched channel equals null, so if the channel has been removed or the bots cannot find it, in that case we tell the exact same error. So we say await reply async and then our error message. But instead of stopping right there, we also say await underscore servers dot clear welcome async and then the context.guild.id. And now when someone executes this command and there is some issue with the channel, it will automatically disable the welcoming module. Now if we go a bit more down here, we can make a nice if statement. So if there is a fetched background, so if fetched background is not null, then we can return both the background and the channel. So in that case what we can do is we can say await reply async, and then we can say the channel used for the welcome module is, and then here we can mention the channel. So let's put a $ at the start and then say fetched channel dot mention and then dot, and then we get a new line, so \n. The background is set to, and then we can use the fetched background. Now again, like I said earlier, you could completely modify this. You could turn this into a nice embed, and then you could also make this a hyperlink so it doesn't show a long URL. But you could, for example, just say the background is set to this, or you could, for example, send the image with the embed. That's all up to you. I'm not going to do this. That's not the purpose of this episode. It's just to show you that you can also return these values to the user. Now else, so if it's not the case and there is no fetched background, then we just want to return the first part. So we can just copy this right here, paste it right there, end the string, user bracket, and then a semicolon. Now when we've all done that, we can just return, and now when we execute this command, it will show us all of these options. Now the next thing that we want to do is to check for what the option is that was given. So what we want to do here is if the option equals channel, so if there has been given an option and that option is channel, then we also want to make sure that the value that was provided is not null. So if the option equals channel and the value is not null, then we can modify the value of the channel. Now what we can do for the channel is we can fetch the channel, so make sure that it actually exists. In order to do so, we can say if ulong.tryParse, and then we pass in the value, and we have an out ulong of parsed ID. Now what this basically means is it's going to try parsing the value that was used as the channel and then try passing it towards a ulong. But that would mean that we would just need to give the ID of the channel. And not every single user really knows what the ID of a channel is. They rather just mention the channel. And so instead of using ulong.tryParse, what we can do is we can say mention utils.tryParseChannel. So instead of using ulong, it will give us the idea of a parsed channel. So you can just mention a channel and it will then give you the ID. Now to even make this more simple, we're just going to add an exclamation mark right here, and we're going to say await reply async, and we're going to give an error, please pass in a valid channel. So now it will return an error when the mention utils failed to pass a channel. Next thing we want to do is we want to modify the value into our database to the new parsed ID. So what we can do here is we can say await underscore servers dot modify welcome async. Then we want to pass in the ID of our server, so context.guild.id, and we want to pass in the new ID of the channel, so we'll say parsed ID, just like that. Another important thing that we need to talk about is making sure that the channel actually exists, because this does pass the channel from a mention to an ID, but that doesn't mean it also checks whether the channel actually exists. So what we can do here is we can say var parsed channel equals context.guild.getTextChannel, and we pass in the parsed ID. And so now we have a variable that actually has the parsed channel, and if the parsed channel equals null, so if the channel does not exist, in that case we say await reply async, and we give exactly the same error. And we can just copy these two lines, paste them right here, and now we can modify the value, and when it succeeds we can say await reply async, use a $ string and say successfully modified the welcome channel to, and then the channel, so pass channel dot mention, just like that, and now we have a nice success message. And of course we want to return. Now another option that's able to be modified is the background URL. So here what we do is we can say, we can just copy this, go here, if the option equals the background and the value is not null, then we can just skip this. We don't really need to pass or check for the channel. Rather, we can just modify the channel right away. So we can say modify background async, and we pass in the value. Next, we can say successfully modified the background to, and then the value. Now, indeed, you could check whether or not the background URL is actually an image and that kind of stuff. But in some cases, the URL does not use an extension at the end. For example, .png, .jpg, that kind of stuff. And because we really have a failsafe inside of our image generating process, we don't really need to check for this value. We can assume that our user will give us a valid background, and even if he or she doesn't, it will still give a other backup background URL. So it's fine. You don't really need to check this. However, if you'd like to do this anyway, I will have a simple explanation on how to do this in the description, because it's a little bit more detailed. But if you like to do these kind of things, make sure to take a look in the description down below, So you can also check whether the background actually exists, perhaps even if it matches the dimensions that you like it to have or some other things. You can just work around with that. It will be fine. Make sure to take a look on it. So now we can both modify the channel and the background, but we also want to be able to clear the background or to just disable the entire module. So what we can do here is we can say if the option equals clear, then we can just entirely get rid of the channel ID, so the module won't do anything anymore. So we also want to make sure that the value is nothing. So if and the value equals null, in that case what we do here is we say await underscore servers dot clear welcome async, and then we can say context dot guild dot id. So we pass in the server ID. We reply, we say await reply async, and then we say successfully cleared the welcome channel. So we no longer send any messages to it, and then we return. And another option that we also want is to clear the background. And a simple way of doing this is when someone provides a specific value with the background, then we can clear the background. And we can do this simply by saying if the value equals clear. So if the user decided to give the value clear, in that case we say await underscore servers dot clear background async context dot guild dot id, and we say await reply async successfully cleared the background for this server, and then we say return. So now we have all the options that we need. We can clear the welcome ID from the database, so it won't really do anything anymore. We have commands in order to modify the background. We have commands in order to modify the channel by using a mention. We have functions to fetch some information about our module. And the final thing we really want to do, if you pass in something wrong in an option that doesn't exist or a value the wrong way around, in that case what we can do here is we can say await reply async you did not use this command properly, semicolon, and that's it. Now the final thing we need to do before running the bot is to go to our command handler, and as we did before, we check first if of course there contains any rules. But someone asked into comments and also in the Discord support server, how can we use runmode.async for events? And that's a really good question, because in some cases events, and especially generating images, could take 1 or 2 seconds. And in order to do this, what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new task. We're going to say private async handle user joined, and then a socket guild user arg, and then brackets. Then we can cut all of this code. So we say Ctrl X and we paste it right here. And of course add task right here, and then we can get rid of all of this. Then we can say a lambda expression, and then we say new task, and then brackets, and then in here we say async, again a lambda expression, and then we say await handle user joined, and then we pass in the argument, and of course a semicolon at the end. What this does is it creates a separate task from all of the events, and then on that task, it will run the handle user async task, the task that we're running right here. So in here, what we can do is we can do all of the code that we like without blocking anything else. But because we also want to do something else other than the roles, we also want to kind of modify this value. So instead of saying if the roles.count is lower than 1, we want to make sure that it's higher than 0. And if that's the case, we want to give the user the roles. So if it's higher than 0, we say await arg.addRoles async, just like that. Now what we want to do is we want to see if there is a welcome channel set. So what we can do here is we can go and say var channel ID equals await underscore servers dot get welcome async, and we pass in the arg.guild.id. Now if the channel ID equals 0, then we return, nothing else should happen. But if that's not the case, we want to make sure that the channel actually still exists. So what we do then is we say var channel equals arg dot guild dot get text channel, and we pass in the channel ID just like that. Now, if the channel equals null, then we want to return, and we also want to get rid of the channel in the database. So we say await underscore servers dot clear welcome async, and we pass in the arg.guild.id, and then we return. Now, if that's not the case, and we can just use all of what we just made, then we can actually send the image towards the channel. But before doing so, we want to inject the images class that we made here into our command handler. So let's go to our command handler, go all the way back up, say private read-only images underscore images. And then we go here, and then we say images, images. Finally, we say underscore images equals images. Now we can go a bit more down, and we can say string path equals await underscore images dot create image async. Then we pass in the user that was passed in all the way here. So we say arg, and we end with a semicolon. Now, we did not really use the background yet. So how can we do this? And this requires modifying the images method. So the images class. So let's go to the images class, get a bit more up. And what we want to add here is say string URL. And now what we can do is we can use this parameter and then pass it right here where we fetch image async the background. Now we want this parameter to be optional because there is a case where someone doesn't really have a background yet. So we say string URL equals null. An even more simpler way is to just copy the image that you would like to be set as the background and then replace it with null. So when there's no URL passed, it will just use your default background. Then you want to pass in again, of course, the value right here, so it will really work. Now let's go back to our command handler, and we also want to fetch, of course, the background. So we say var background equals, and then we say await underscore servers dot get background async arg.guild.id. Now, of course, we want to do something based upon the background, and what we can do here is we can just pass in the background, because if there is no background, it will be null, and if it's null, then in that case it will use a default background. Now finally, what we want to do is we want to say await, and then we say channel dot send file async, and then the path, and then as text we want no text, so we say path and then null. And now finally what we want to do is we want to delete the file, so we say system.io.file.delete and then the path, so we no longer need the image, and thus we remove it. Now let's see if this works. So let's go here and of course replace the infrastructure project of the starter project. Let's replace that with the template right over there, and then let's run our code. Now let's go back to Discord and let's execute the command. So welcome, and it will tell us there has not been set a welcome channel yet. Now, as I said before, we can just mention a channel in order to modify it. So let's go here and create a new channel, and let's call the channel welcome. So now we can set the channel to something else, or we can actually enable the module in this case, and we can say exclamation mark welcome, and then we can say channel because we want to modify the channel, and then we can say hashtag welcome. Now it says successfully modified the welcome channel to welcome. And now if we go back to our browser and we refresh this page, you'll see that it now has an ID, which is perfect. Now this in theory means that it already works, but let's make it even more interesting. Let's modify the background. Let's go to our browser. Let's go to unsplash.com and let's just grab an image. This one looks pretty nice. Let's copy the image address and let's say welcome, then the background, then the URL, and it says successfully modified the background to, and then the image that was passed in. Now what we can do is we can use the welcome command again, and we can see if everything works. So as you see, it says the channel used for the welcome module is hashtag welcome, and the background is set to, and then the image. So this all works perfect. Let's go back to Visual Studio because I made a stupid mistake. We do create a new task, but we never tell it to run. So let's replace the lambda expression with some curly brackets, just like that, and then store the new task into a variable. So just like this, new task equals new task. And then we say new task dot start. So it also really starts the task. And just using this doesn't mean it will wait for it. It just means that it will start the task and that it will actually work. Now, if we run our code again and go back to Discord, let's quickly create an invite link and let's go to the alt account. So as you can see, I'm not in a server, which means that it will generate a new image when we join the server. So let's add a server, join server, and say my invite link and then join the server. Now it can take a few seconds before it really sends something to the welcome channel, but as you can see, it now sends director joined the server, member number 3, that's correct, and it uses the background that we set earlier. Now if we leave the server again and go back to Discord and modify the background again, so we say welcome background, and then let's go here, back to Unsplash, and let's search for some new image. Let's use this one, looks pretty nice. Copy the image address, go to Discord, and let's type in the image address. Now it says successfully modified the background to, and then a new link. Let's go back to here, invite people, create a new link, go back to the browser and join the server again. And as you can see, it again sends an image and it uses the background that we just passed in, and also uses our name, nice image. It works perfect. It works really nicely. And also when we go to our console, you'll see no errors telling you like, hey, this event is taking too long. Let's close our console. Let's go back to our Visual Studio. So that's really basic. If you want to run a task on a separate process so it won't block anything else, the only thing you need to do is create a new task, which is asynchronously, and then pass in the task that you want to run. And then of course, don't forget to actually start the task. And that's it for this episode. We can now modify where welcome images should be sent to, just like this, and it looks pretty nicely. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, and I know it has been a pretty short episode compared to the previous episode, which was over an hour long, but if you did enjoy this episode, just please leave a like. If you like the series, please subscribe, as there will be more episodes for the series, and I'm sure that you'll like them. They're going to be pretty amazing. And of course, if you haven't watched all of the previous episodes yet, make sure to go and watch them. And finally, all of this code will again be uploaded to the GitHub repository. So if you missed something or you don't understand something, you could simply go take a look in the GitHub repository, or of course join the Discord support server. I hope to see you in the next episode. Have a nice day.